Is there adequate help available for those who wish to grow? In other words, for those who don't have time to do what Einstein did, and that is invent relativity. Yes, there was some precursors out there, information-wise, but he basically worked like a crazed banshee for 20 years and ruined his health, had to recover, in fact, for a whole year under the help of a cousin of his whom he later married. That's how hard he worked. If we don't have the intellect and time and a modicum of money to do this, like Einstein did, what chance do we have of getting to the root causes of our emotional struggles? And is thus any proper help available? For instance, I saw a video not long back of Lady Gaga. I believe at 19 she had a sexual trauma experience, to put it lightly, and despite top quality therapy, as she would put it, which she said most can't avail themselves of, for reasons of the price, for one thing. She said despite this therapy, she still has problems with shame and other issues. And in fact, if you look at her material on videos and so on, you'll see that she has a strong sexual component to her life that arguably reflects that she could stand to do more developing. And yes, she is young. Now, if we're not talking therapy, there was psychoanalysis, but today there are only some 2,000 analysts out there. And it's a very questionable endeavor, for we all may have some inkling of Barbara Streisand having been in analysis for decades, and so also Woody Allen, both to questionable results. If someone says also they don't want to turn to a secular approach, or they have thought, experienced, or seen that such therapy approaches and analysis approaches don't really pay much dividends, then maybe they want to try religion. And I have a friend, my best friend from high school, who did this as an alternative. And he went from religion to religion to religion. Finally, the religion of no religion and staying in his basement, basically. Others I believe, pursue emotional relief and growth through purchasing things or through distractions in general. Yet others through piling up a lot of money for the exigencies of life to come, as well as a form of isolating, what I call getting your own island, whether it's your own home, which we call our own castle, or literally an island. Noting, I was told recently by someone in a local Greek restaurant that the owner of which is of Greek descent, that he heard that Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, now lives in Greece. Maybe Fred Rogers has an island, and that's his way of happiness and lowering of emotional strain and suffering. And of course, there's the old standby to go to your local health clinic and get meds, so to speak, which in my opinion bring a lot of downsides, and yes, may prolong your life and keep you out of prison, but with many downsides. To note, of course, many that I've known who have used, quote, medications, found upon use of such that they had to take demotions at work and take work in general that involved slower pace of life and less thinking. Of course, then the stigma's involved too. And you have to ask yourself then, while there are supporters of various people in high places like Oprah, Tony Robbins, various presidents, you have to wonder, if all of these people have such considerable flaws, some would say, why couldn't they get therapy or analysis or anything else that would properly help? Why are they only half grown, so to speak, in my opinion? Noting, by the way, for those who are Gandhi fans or some other exemplary leader, I would have to say I don't think any of the people I've ever mentioned so far fit the bill of a Gandhi. And yes, Gandhi had some issues himself, but of a smaller scale, I would say myself personally. Now, I would have to say this too, that I believe from my studies of Freud, reading and watching videos of him and so on, that Freud was much more of a poet than he was a critical thinker in terms of complex thinking. And so many who criticize Freud don't really understand, I think, this facet that he delved into many areas, but if you read his writings, they're very verbose and very unclear. Whereas Brian Tracy, a top salesman in this country and lecturer on it, now in his 70s, has put out, for instance, a video, The 7 C's of Success. And the first issue Brian Tracy brings up is that clarity is of utmost importance. And I'm afraid Freud struck very low on that level. Now, I'd like to focus on therapy and analysis and why it seems that nobody really does very well through this process, except in very, very few instances. And even then, I don't know of many at all who come out the rabbit hole completely. I might even add, we have some top YouTube channel hosts who talk of their past trauma, and yet, and also limiting beliefs that they claim they have eliminated or conquered. And yet you have to wonder, if that's so, why do they even need to do a show that sucks up so much of their time from other matters that they might be happier at? I don't really buy that they're doing it for other people so they can help other people. That may be a little component, but I don't see that as a major component. I still see the adulation for money and fame and distractions through overwork as key components, even at these top, shall we say, lecturers or talk show hosts on YouTube, for instance, who claim they've eliminated their problems with limiting beliefs, for instance. So, it strikes me even, you hear the phrase, those who can do and those who can't teach. Well, you have to wonder, given all the stresses and strains and locked in career-wise situation of therapists and analysts, you have to wonder whether this also applies teachers and therapists and analysts. Those who can do, those who can't teach, do therapy or analysis. For I would be pretty bored doing therapy for 30, 40 years or more, or analysis also, and pretty burnt out also. I'd be on a ton of tranquilizers, in fact. And of course, like that movie Prime with Meryl Streep as a therapist or analyst, she needed her own analyst. So what gets people to top levels of functioning, in some cases arguably? Although even here there's a strong urge again for fame, money, and the distractions of the career. I have some ideas here. And they're not baked into the training of a therapist or analyst today. And I'll get to why I think that is in a moment. I would say, those who are farmers, those who play sports and do well at it, especially at the professional level, those who are in carpentry, say, sometimes also auto repair, even air conditioning repair, etc., and plumbing, nuts and bolts areas, seem to me to have a strong advantage when it comes to understanding life. For several reasons, they're able to handle complexity versus just use of lots of words. In fact, I would joke and say there are two types of careers or jobs in general. The nuts and bolts jobs and the words jobs. I would have to say, by the way, after having listened to part of a audiobook about George Carlin's life, Last Words, that he had no encouraging words to say perhaps about his father, as per saying his father was a, quote, BS artist of great talent. That comes with the use of words. Also, many politicians are very skilled with words, and there are videos out on how words can be used to deceive. Now, I'll bring up, for instance, the great actor Harrison Ford. I watched Actors Guild show about him. He was on it once upon a time, and they were talking about an aspect of his personality, his humility, to the extent he has it, and he pointed out that a key factor in his personal growth that later reflected in his acting career and success as one of the top box office draws was his having spent many, many years as a carpenter, and a carpenter to the stars, basically, out in California. So he credits this, amongst most any other thing, to his success later as an actor. I believe because it taught him the nuts and bolts of how to approach reality. And as another man I know who talks of course creation, Ayman Aghi says, you can't skip steps. So, as a carpenter or other worker in a nuts and bolts area, including auto repair, if you leave out a part on a car or even do a plumbing job and don't put in a valve or something, it won't work. And in other areas of life, though, you may be able to massage the fact it doesn't work with words. Or through nonverbal communication like a smile or fast talking. Hence the term slick operator. I would also say, too, as a farmer, if plants die, if crops die, or if you don't have the patience to plant seed after having tilled the land, and then wait and water when necessary and fertilize, your crops won't grow right or give low yield or die soon. The same for those raising horses on a thoroughbred farm. If you want them to survive long term and have sturdy bones of a sort and win races, you can't just do mediocre effort and apply words to win the races at Churchill Downs. It's the performance of the horses that count, not words as to how pretty the horses look, or their genetic stock, or where they came from, or what kind of feed they were fed. And even the same goes for pouring concrete for someone's driveway or building a building. If it collapses down the line soon or the concrete cracks, the business won't be in vogue for long, and there will be lawsuits. And you can't talk that away or smile it away or talk fast it away. Yes, pouring concrete, if you don't pour certain chemicals in, perhaps to make it dry faster, if that's the way that works, if you skip steps thus, it's not going to work right. You can't blame it on someone else. The buck stops with the person creating the product in these cases. And you can't say that your plants didn't grow right because they had a chemical imbalance, and that they didn't find the right therapist or the right med, or that they didn't try hard enough in therapy. I actually personally think it's a blessing if someone grows up in a poorer setting financially and maybe often doesn't go to college as a result, or want to go to college by way of the parents' persuasion of such, and they take up a nuts and bolts job, which provides a lot of training in patience, in not skipping steps, in doing the hard work, and a very minimum of opportunity to use words and nonverbal communication like smiling and fast talking and gestures and enthusiasm to make corrections for what one didn't do that I just outlined. This then is in part, I believe, why you see a rift, so to speak, between what they call the social classes, or also between country versus urban people. Noting that Colorado 10, 15 years ago had a situation in which rural people wanted to secede from urban people and start a new state. Why would that be? Probably because the rural people were much more nuts and bolts oriented than the urban people, who used words much more, and thus could talk away a non-performance state that would otherwise be unacceptable. Now, I would also say that mathematics in general helps a lot with complexity, and therapists are required to take only a few bunny courses, so to speak, or simply calculator-type courses as per statistics. It's just rote memorization and plug-and-chugging, as they say, of the numbers. Kind of like following a cookbook recipe. Mathematics, ideally, is much, much more than that. In fact, it's called the queen of the sciences, ideally. Hence, when we look at Einstein, many people don't understand or know that Einstein was not just the creator of the theory of relativity, but he was a great leader in the world against the Nazi regime and for human rights in general. And where did that come from if not his strong mathematical and physics talent? He had to, in fact, dig deep and reinvent or find new forms of mathematics when he was stymied at one point in his theories, his development of his theories in relativity. And this then transferred to understanding people. So I'd say, for instance, while we may consider many a mathematician a nerd and not a people person, I think, ironically, you can't be a people person if you don't have strong complexity talent. And yes, some of these individuals would go into back offices and would prefer not to be with people, but you also have great mathematical skilled people, technically skilled people who create cutting-edge science fiction ideas. Hence, Star Trek, in my opinion, having addressed many social issues from, quote, the development of ideas from the so-called nerd, who was talented in mathematics and technology at a minimum, way above the, quote, liberal arts-trained person. Noting, by the way, that Steve Jobs was trained in both technology at Reed College and art, or liberal arts, I believe. He melded the two together, and we had then the great inventions of the iPhone and iPad, for instance. Now also, great sports players at the professional level work very, quote, scientifically, very methodically, and they don't skip steps. They film everything they do. They watch it after games. They have coaches that use behavioral therapy modification techniques, and on and on and on. You might say they're very mathematical. I might add then, I, as a West Point graduate, was trained repeatedly in sports there. I had to take sports all year round in classes and play at least on an intramural team all year round too, and do parades also throughout the year, all 4 years. And so I was required to take courses in boxing, courses in gymnastics, wrestling, swimming, and then on upper level courses, some things like perhaps tennis. But I was required to take a gamut of courses, and some of them I almost didn't pass, by the way, due to my physique being quite limited in strength, shall we say. Gymnastics and boxing were not my favorite classes. But MacArthur, General MacArthur, pushed sports very heavily upon all cadets in the 1940s, for instance, as part of the year-round curriculum. might add, with some humor, that during my first year, my first or second sport for half a year was to weightlift with the football players on the West Point football team to beef me up because I was thin as a rail. Very, very thin. I was also, put on the football players' dinner tables. I sat with all the football players and got their double rations to beef me up also. And I don't know how it happened, but my first roommate was a football player on the West Point football team. So sports were very important. And I played then intramural soccer one season, and the company commander over me, a captain or major, who incidentally had once played before going into the military on the St. Louis Cardinals baseball professional team, and later was in special forces, he saw I could use some extra training, and so the next year he required that I be a referee in soccer. And the first game, I didn't know what in the world I was doing, but I sure learned fast. After apologizing profusely after my first referee of my first game. Now, next I noticed that impactful greatly on my life were 3 ham radio operators who did nuts and bolts work. One was a TV repairman, a Jewish man. Another did electronic repair for a company called Univac. He also hunted, collected stamps, and was a foster father, amongst other things, and camped. Very practical man. He even took me riding on his motorcycle behind him when I was 12 years old and popped a wheelie one day, which if my parents had known, they would have had a cow. So very formative in my life at the 9th grade was a mathematician, i.e. my first year's algebra teacher, who was also a ham operator, and before being a mathematics teacher had been an electronic technician as an enlisted man in the Air Force for a while, maybe a few years. So he too, starting off as a nuts and bolts man. And after each class, after each day's classes were over in 9th grade, I would go and help him clean up the classroom for half an hour and talk with him for a whole year. And he would also drive me to various ham meetings and ham conventions, and he really rubbed off on me. A very humble man, a very calm-mannered and gentle, still alive as of last year when I called him up, and his wife too, both age of 95 in their own home, no Alzheimer's, and they had a physical therapist at their home in Minnesota. Next, engineering can be very, very useful. Did we know that Boris Yeltsin, who helped bring down the wall, was once trained as an engineer, and in fact he did much constructing of buildings as a leader in the engineering field in the party, so to speak, in Russia. Next, what about the issue, say, of Gorbachev? Did we know he came from a small village, much dominated by farming? I believe he helped bring in a record crop, working 20 hours a day when he was about 18 years of age. Also, Boris Yeltsin, for this matter, came from small rural atmosphere also in the Ural Mountains. I just have to say at this point that my major at West Point was electrical engineering, and starting at age 41, I spent 4 years half-time status as a community member studying mathematics at Berea College, which was a scholarship-only college for Appalachian people and for others from other countries who would also apply. And the courses at the top levels in mathematics really were very difficult for me. Next, Ajahn Brahm, one of the leading Buddhists, in my opinion, in Australia today, heading up a monastery there, is so popular. When he goes to prisons, those he helps never come back, it's said, and prison officials invite him back repeatedly and say, we only want a John Braun back. And when he went to Los Angeles to give a lecture once, he was mobbed by the crowd. He tried to go to the bathroom or restroom to escape, and they followed him even in there. His book signings took at least 1 hour after lectures, and he says he's thinking of wearing a wig the next time. And that psychologists and psychiatrists pick up on his ideas, and it comes out 5 years later what he once said 5 years earlier. A physicist by training at Cambridge University who spent 1 year or so teaching and then 10 years in the jungle with his training leader, so to speak, in Thailand before hitting the streets, so to speak, in Australia, where it took a couple of years to get traction. Also, there's a man, I think his name is El Farak in Egypt, who has a master's in business. And he has excellent material, in my opinion, in psychology, and is training at this time for psychology degrees, if not having a master's already. But I believe the MBA really did the trick. Also, I would say one of the best books I've ever seen on divorces for the benefit of women comes from a woman who has a master's in business administration, which requires a lot of mathematics and application of understanding of people too. Because understanding how to sell products is a people-oriented business. I'd finally mention, in the political sphere in America lately, that Mr. Trump had a master's in business administration from one of the finest business schools, Wharton College. And his father was very much in business. I'll just leave it at that then. So, if there is a general consensus amongst many that therapy does not do a very good job for us, to say it lightly, nor analysis, why might that be, if not that schooling, i.e. training, does not require what I have gone to great lengths to detail here. It doesn't require extremely great skill in sports, if any skills. It doesn't require nuts and bolts training in anything like electronic repair, plumbing, farming, and so on. It doesn't require basically any mathematics worth talking of. Did I mention engineering? It doesn't require that, or a master's in business administration. By the way, I would mention a very interesting minister from the Caribbean who died not long back in a plane crash, I believe in his 50s, Miles Monroe, once urged ministers in training to get a degree in business and not in Bible, per se. And he was very popular through the world through his lectures and made, quote, a mint of money for what it's worth. If that is something someone is quite interested in, for whatever reasons, plus and minuses. Even this, quote, minister of great proportion, and very moving and very insightful in many a way, and very encouraging of how to be a good writer, for instance, amongst other things, had talked about getting a business degree. I would even say another thing that just popped in my mind. Marie Forleo, who has an interesting book that I have, very interesting woman, very motivating. Everything is Figure Outable is the name of the book. She once was working on the stock market, I believe you could say, the stock market. And for what it's worth, Martha Stewart, the same thing. Might I say, too, facetiously, that in my third or fourth year at West Point, some trained professionals in psychology were brought in once to give a class to a group of us cadets in stress management. And our joke afterward was that these individuals were touchy-feely people, i.e., they gave you great smiles and motivation, And maybe a warm, fuzzy feeling, but a week later, what good did it do? Not much more than our calling them touchy-feely people. I might also add, I knew once a cadet there who I ate some meals with, who once went to a Catholic group for a weekend seminar, and she came back glowing, but a week later that had all worn off. You might say again, touchy-feely results that soon faded. We don't want a pat on the back from therapists, we don't want encouragement, and we don't want a bunch of pills and all the downsides to that. We want results. So why aren't therapists doing all this training that all these other great performers in a variety of areas are doing? And why, moreover, isn't it required? For, say, a surgeon is at least required to take some classes in how to operate with a knife, right? A scalpel. There are many fluff courses, perhaps, like learning all the names of the bones in anatomy class, and that's soon forgotten, as well as perhaps the 40-letter name of aspirin and many other drugs. But yet, surely they have some classes on how to wield a scalpel or how to use anesthesia properly and so on. If they only had a breezy bunny course, so to speak, or two in this, as therapists are required in mathematics and more, then we would be not happy campers even more so. I'd add, there was a great surgeon of one time, Ben Carson, who did great brain surgeries with much risk-taking. There's a video out on him, in fact, Gifted Hands. I have yet to watch it, but I have a book of his I read, Take the Risk, I believe it's called, which I did read. And I sure would like to know his upbringing in terms of these nuts and bolts aspects. I would say, by the way, after surgery was a career that he moved on from in time, he went to work for the U.S. government in housing and urban development, which theoretically is a somewhat nuts and bolts industry of the government. So why isn't all of this mandated? I mean, if West Point could mandate I took all these sports, and if it mandated I had to take a lot of engineering, regardless of even if I wanted to major in time in psychology like my best friend had, who incidentally became a 3-star general, why don't colleges and the boards governing the curriculum require what West Point required of its cadets? Every cadet, every officer and athlete, for instance, like MacArthur so promoted and wrote into the curriculum, basically. And why was every cadet, and still, required to take a lot of engineering courses and a lot of mathematics also? A lot. To the extent classes were conducted 6 days a week, not 5. Well, could it just be that maybe certain people would rather see therapists not be so highly equipped as a top baseball player is equipped? Otherwise, we probably wouldn't watch them. The same with football, basketball, and so on. Maybe, in fact, some people who go to football games or basketball games at the pro level don't always appreciate the level of what I call the vigorousness expressed on the field, but they do appreciate the level of skill in other areas and wish they had it themselves and wish to emulate it somehow and maybe hope it would rub off, or at least that it's inspirational. Well, it strikes me that those who complain of materialism in our country, or capitalism, or of eroded values, or eroded spirituality, or what have you, or want to go back even to a, quote, simpler time as per the notion of nostalgia, maybe a lot of this has to do with certain people in our country wishing to promote the consuming way, as I would put it, what you call the distractive way, I would also put it, through a lot of objects, which also help for status. And so maybe some elements in our society have promoted the curriculums of therapists and analysts that give short shrift to what is otherwise a kingpin need for promoting top actors, actresses, carpenters for that matter, plumbers, air conditioner repairmen, car automotive experts, and so on. Not to mention top leaders in political spheres, sometimes in Russia, and top spiritual leaders too. Or there is, in one of Brian Tracy's videos on sales, right from the get-go, he's addressing the issue that salespeople often have a bad image. And right from the get-go, he says, along with a man named Marvin, I'm trying to remember his first name or last name as to that, they both address this, that salesmen have a reputation for selling things people don't want, don't need, and can't afford. And maybe to an extent that's quite true in certain circles. And so there's quite a struggle here, and maybe some people have pushed training of therapists and analysts for that matter, such that their training is not up to snuff in the areas I've been outlining. And so people turn in droves now to other options like meditation, mindfulness meditation, and so on. And even to the individuals leading things on YouTube talking of limiting beliefs. Of course, there's also the element, arguably, but maybe not the compelling one to the most, that there is much profit in drug sales to give to people who are not benefiting by therapy or would, alternatively. And the prison system is a cash cow industry also. And the medical system, as per the number of people going for medical care constantly, before the age of 60 even, arguably, yes, sometimes for stress, but sometimes just because it's marketed so strongly. Even Caleb Jones has talked of how, in his opinion, many doctors have the job of scaring people. Scaring people basically about diseases that have a low probability of happening, so they come back for more treatments and so on. Of course, education itself, as per even getting a PhD or MD degree in a, quote, helping profession regarding people, thus therapy or psychiatry or analysis, takes an awful long time. And questionably, noting, by the way, Freud brought this up as to the question, is it necessary to have a medical degree to be an analyst? And he said no. In fact, also, Dr. Gottlieb, a psychologist who talks interestingly about relationships, right from the get-go in one of her videos, addressed the question of whether therapists sometimes aren't telling people what they need to know. Well, what is it they need to know? It strikes me, maybe we need to know more of things that are not going to promote purchasing things all the time, or piling up lots of money for exigencies. Maybe we need to know there are other approaches than drugging things away, and regarding our brains all too often as broken. Maybe we need to know what some countries have known for a long time and yet are called third world countries all too often. Maybe we need to totally redefine what poverty is, in fact, and homelessness, and destitution, and, quote, living in your car, which I facetiously call a teepee with metal skin on wheels. Are we going to call thus the Native American Indians homeless because their teepee isn't made of drywall and it's small? Noting it's inferior even to a car in certain respects. It can be blown all too easily in the wind and is not very mobile compared to a car. and it needs a horse to draw it, and setup time. And it takes a fire to heat, not the 500 horses under the hood of an engine of a car. So maybe America is in a very great shift, as is the world in general. We more and more want results, and we want it fast, and we're more and more demanding results. And with the internet age, there's much more option to spread ideas of a variety of sorts. Maybe we need to get beyond several things, like the concept only a trained professional can help us, and that only trained professionals have the proper training in the people areas. If this training were given to sports figures or mandated for them, we probably wouldn't go to many sports games at the professional level. And the same for watching movies with top actors and actresses portraying various roles. Or when we go to the sports arena or turn on the TV, we want results, at least as per what turns us on the most. We don't want to have to say, well, this is what is put out by a trained professional. We had certain training mandated that, in my own opinion, would have killed off the talent in most great actors, actresses, political leaders who are really top-notch, and so on. Of course, this is not restricted just to America. There's a video out by Osho from the Eastern tradition entitled something of the nature, They Don't Want You to Know This. And for many, many years, centuries in fact, blacks were held back from learning to read and write. You have to wonder if maybe America needs to stop being held back so far, so much, etc., in the areas of growth, personal growth through therapy, as opposed to, quote, meds and being told our brains are broken. By getting things in proper perspective here through first training people right in these areas. I might add, I once read a book on alternative medicine, and it pointed out that some chiropractors are very wonderful and some are very not so wonderful, and that there's a wide gamut. There might thus also be a wide gamut, surely, between therapists and analysts. Surely some therapists have the skill of being able to turn a light switch on, and that's about it. Whereas a few therapists might have designed the light switch and the light bulb, or to that effect. There's such a wide gap here, and that's just a little analogy that popped into my head right now to exemplify this. Is it any wonder, then, that you've heard sometimes that the best ideas come from outside of an industry? Maybe that's if the industry doesn't have a very good curriculum as per what most all in the industry are required to take. I'm not even going to touch this aspect of the joke, which in my mind has a lot of merit, that those who go into therapy as per training for it at a college setting are there to heal themselves, first of all. I would say I went to West Point not to be a soldier per se, but to have them pay for medical school, and I had high hopes of this my first year until my grades didn't cut the mustard. West Point would have paid for my medical training in medical school, and that's the only reason I went. So maybe we need to take a good look at why therapists are called trained professionals, and what is the training required. And, just on and on and on about this, but these key factors, what is the training required? If it were required in the same manner for actors, actresses, top football and basketball players, I think we would never go to the professional football, basketball, etc. games. Maybe some don't go to these games because these people are so skilled, it looks so perfected that it's boring, so to speak, some say. are tired of the amount of money compared to the ticket payer that the pros are making. And I won't comment more on that. To me, money is not the moniker of happiness by any means. It brings a lot of headaches. One final note. Not only is it difficult thus to get, in my opinion, difficult is a minor word here, or an understatement of the century, top help from a trained professional in therapy or analysis, those who do wish to offer advice from channels other than that of having a degree in this area are going to have a tough row to hoe. For I was listening to a course on Udemy on how to be a life coach, and one whole chapter was devoted to how to navigate the legal realities of offering life coaching when you don't have a degree in psychology, basically, or in medicine per se. It can get very sticky. Also, the same thing thus in selling herbs. In fact, there's one Christian man who created his own salve, an ointment for the skin, sold it, marketed it, and went to prison as a result for conflict thus with the federal government. There was Roy Masters, who was a great spiritual leader, some would say, of a sort, who was sued and adjudicated to spend 30 days in prison for practicing medicine without a license. Now, maybe that's changing a little more and more, but there is still a great deal of problem legally in offering any material in certain settings other than if one is a minister. Offering help in certain settings if you're not trained in the curriculum mandated by college boards or college, I don't know what they call it, that vet and promote the curriculum in our colleges today for trained professionals in psychology or analysis. Just have to say, I really scratch my head at best over how a country that is said to be so great, so rich, so powerful, has a training system that, in my mind, would not do justice if required before people could go into football, playing at the professional level, basketball, acting, or even politics. Some things to consider here, I think.